Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 9, Episode 48 of our weekly Q&A video/podcast. You're watching it wherever you are, and there's a way to watch it on the other platform, and I will leave that as an exercise to you, the listener, to figure out how to get from one to the other, if you're interested. And I'll give you a hint, which is just the answer. The information is in the description of the video, if you're on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so... To get started, do you want to go through sort of the team that we're looking at? And then I want to talk a tiny bit about what I've been playing recently. Okay. Not a recommendation, but just to talk about it.
Oh, speaking of playing recently, you know, I was just going back over our notes. We still, now that Adios is free, the copy that we're giving away is meaningless now, but we were giving away a copy. Nobody claimed it.
Yeah, very funny. But yeah, this is a good point. We're going to get into it in a second. Right. Adios is free on the Epic Games Store right now, and it's a great game, and I super recommend it.
Right. So this is the Suicide Squad team. And tying it into... So we mentioned in the weekly recap last week that Enchantress gear gives 6 skulls. Instead of the regular 3, you get 6 when you have a full when you're using it on a full team of 3 Suicide Squad characters. And it's a nice follow-up to the question that we had last week from Ryzan Vacha about the timing to get it right. So in order to strip gears completely, the person who's got the skulls has 2 bars of power, also has a Claw of Horus, does a special 1.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe shatters gear, maybe doesn't. The skulls come in, and if you time the special one, the second special one right, each of the skulls coming in gets the effect of the special. So you have 3 more shots at triggering the gear shattering.
And by timing it right, you mean timing it so that the skulls come out during the special, right?
Right. And it's not exactly during the special, but there's a timing of it so that it's part of it, like it's because there's a long some specials have a long animation, some have a shorter one, so you just have to time it right. And the reason why it's interesting is because why it's so good on Suicide Squad team is because with 6 skulls you've got a bigger window. It's basically like, you know how Deadshot has that wide thing with the aiming mini game. And so if we talk enough and there's enough, or maybe I'll just stick in the footage anyway, so normally what I do is I put enough footage to match what we're talking about. Yeah. And right now what you're going to see is a run of 5 ultimates with the Suicide Squad team. Mm-hmm. If we end up talking longer than that, I'll stick in some video that I've been playing with just in the last couple of days with the Dawn of Justice team. Mm. And so the one thing I want to say about that is I was going to make a full Dawn of Justice team, but Dawn of Justice Wonder Woman is so much worse compared to New 52 Wonder Woman that I just had to switch her out. New 52 is just that much better. But the timing of the gears is harder because you only get 3 skulls. But the perfect thing is, though, because I'm using it on Dawn of Justice Superman, if you get special 1 unblocked, and it what it does is it knocks the opponent down and away, you wait until you take the step towards the opponent, and as soon as you've taken that step, then you do next special 1. That's the perfect timing.
So the timing is like telegraph for you. There's like a cue.
Right. So
instead of just needing it to be in your head.
Right. So it's perfectly built in. Your problem will be if they block it, you can still do it potentially, but when you're waiting to do your second special 1, if they do a combo on you and their combo takes too long, your timing is bad. If their combo is just right, which has nothing to do with you, then you can just drop another special 1 that will strip all their gears.
Yeah.
But again, it's a little bit harder. It's only 3 skulls. If you don't time it right, you don't get all the skulls as a Claw of Horus gear shattering trigger. But it's harder with fewer skulls. Suicide Squad team, I hadn't realized this until playing with it more recently, just how good Enchantress was specifically on Suicide Squad. It's good in general because of what it can do for triggering all those effects, but it's so good on the Suicide Squad team.
Nice.
Yeah, and you're going to say something about what you're playing.
Yeah, so the Dead Space remake just came out, and I... don't have that much time for video games right now, and I'm not really in the market for like a brand new one, but I was like, I have Dead Space 2 kicking around, and I had heard good stuff, and so I went in and I'm playing it. So I'm playing Dead Space 2, and it's interesting because I have sort of mixed feelings about it. It's fun enough for what it is, and like I said, I've had a hard time sort of playing single player video games recently, so that's kind of a point in its favor. But there's a really interesting sort of tension between making, because it's like a sort of survival horror game. If you've never heard of it, the sort of gimmick in Dead Space is that you are fighting these they're part zombie, part alien, part whatever, called the necromorph. They're like, they're humans.
Necromorph, dead, change.
Yeah. they're dead people sort of turned into monsters.
Okay.
And they've got these like sharp sort of pokey hands, and they come in a bunch of different forms. So it's just kind of like body horror, like the Thing style, like monsters.
Right.
And their whole shtick is that you're like an engineer. You're not like a fighter, and you have this like laser cutter, and you actually need to cut off their limbs to kill them.
Head.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, their head counts as like one sort of
limb?
thing.
So
yeah.
it's like
their extremities.
So 5 things. You got 5 options. I guess on a man you'd have 6. But no, because you know what it reminds me of? It's is it Muay Thai? That's the 8 deadly limbs or whatever.
I don't know.
So I don't know if you're hearing this. Hold on a second.
Cat is about to knock a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, he's got to get down off the bookshelf.
All right, come on, buddy. Yeah, that's not what we're doing right now. Here we go. Okay. So yeah, but it's a survival horror game, and so the higher difficulties make the enemies deal more damage and make ammo more scarce.
Right.
So you have to miss less shots. And then there's sort of the other way that you can kill things is by impaling them with stuff. So you can either take...
So they get stuck? Does it kill them? Like
it just does damage to them.
Okay.
Like the impalement system kind of is the exception to the rule, where if you just slam them with something a couple times, then they'll die. But you can like on dead necromorphs, you can rip off the spikes on their limbs and throw it at them, and then you can take like anything that looks like a stick in the environment and slam it through them. And so the problem I was running into is I was playing on the normal difficulty, and I was finding it really sort of like trivial. Like I wasn't finding that much difficulty. I was picking up way too much ammo for what I needed.
Right.
And so I was just walking around sort of as a little sort of walking militia, right?
Okay.
And then I turned up the difficulty, and all of a sudden I was having more trouble. I was actually dying sometimes. I was doing more ammo management. I found it a more satisfying experience on the balance in terms of difficulty. But then the problem is, what happens when you fail or do poorly?
Mm-hmm.
So when you die, there's like an animation of them like murdering you, right? And then you just go back to the checkpoint. And so dying functionally just means replaying an area again.
Okay.
And you know where the jump scares are, you know where the enemies are going to come out of, whatever. So it's kind of boring, right? And then if you're taking a lot of damage but not dying, sometimes that can be fun with a sort of like health management system where you have a limited number of healing items and they take up space in your inventory, so you're working with that. But if there's a fight that you're not doing so well on and you're running really low on it, and then there's like another couple of fights before the next time where you're able to get more healing items, then it just becomes kind of a slog. And so the problem is that the ammo management and stuff, the thrill of sort of being in a little bit more danger and needing to be a little bit more careful with your ammo and all that stuff is a lot of fun. But then the actual fail state of dying just makes it suck. It's just not fun. It's not interesting. Right. So I want to be close to dying. I want to feel like I'm threatened. I want to feel like I need to react a little bit faster, shoot a little bit better.
Like bungee jumping?
Yeah.
Where there's the idea it feels like you're in danger.
Yeah.
Or I guess maybe I'm not really analyzing the risk right, because do people die from bungee jumping? It feels like they shouldn't.
I don't know.
If you
bungee jumping can apparently like mess you up though. It can like, because of how like far you're jumping, it can like give you like temporary like blindness. It can like the G forces and stuff can like be a little because when you're at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So it can cause like lasting like brain damage or like vision
sort of
problems and stuff. And like I think it can like reshape your cornea and stuff.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay. So
like in a way that's unpleasant. I have
so that's worse than skydiving then.
I think
because there's not the same shift of, I guess, until you land.
Well, I don't know about the parachute deployment. Maybe with the parachute deployment, there's the same issue. But yeah, it's not smooth enough in its deceleration. Because that's really the thing that hurts you, right? It's not the fall. It's the
sudden
stop at the end. So you need to make sure that the stop is spread out enough that it doesn't do anything. Otherwise, you're
and that your bungee cord is long enough.
Yeah, but not too long. You need the bungee cord to be the right length.
Yeah, long enough but not too long.
Yeah. But so yeah, it's interesting and it's a tension, and so I'm on the harder difficulty. I think there's like 2 higher difficulties, and one of them you need to like beat the game the first time to even unlock or whatever.
Right.
So I'm
to
on,
show
like,
that you're worthy of it.
I'm on like the second highest difficulty, and they say it's like, for people who are familiar with Dead Space, right? And I'm familiar enough with like first person shooters that I can or third person shooters that I can play it. So it's interesting, and so there's a tension there, and I don't know what the solution is either, because if they made it so that you couldn't die, right? Then that also wouldn't be sort of satisfying. There would be no stakes in an entirely different way. But it's a weird balancing act that I'm kind of trying to play myself with difficulty, where it's like every time I die and I just have to play like the same 3-minute section over, I'm like, this isn't, it's not a huge amount of time. You're not asking a lot of me. But as a consequence for dying, taking away the actual like horror element or like the thriller element of it, you taking away the stakes, taking away some of the interest in making like 3 minutes of like gameplay like boring that I have to just do a second time is like not compelling.
Would it change it if you reframed it as, so you failed this the first time, now you get to do sort of a training run, and you sort of because sometimes the games that let you sort of practice the control, the interface, right?
Yeah.
So there's like a no stake kind of sort of task or practice or whatever. Does it change if you think of it like that?
I don't think so, because I mean, like, you think about games that make you die a lot, and the one that I can think of that has the most compelling system is Dark Souls, where you die, you drop your resources, and you're gonna die a million times, and they need to make that fun for you. And so learning it, and it's still not trivialized just because you've learned it. And I think that's a little bit true for Dead Space, where you still need to like hit your shots and figure it out and whatever. But there's not enough. I think one of the other things that I'm running up against in the game is that it's not quite as fine-tuned and precise as I would want it to be for what it is in terms of like shooting the limbs off. I'm sure if I watch somebody who is at like a really high level of play, that would be really impressive. But you're cramped, the third person angle is just enough sort of camera wrangling and all. There's all these things that contribute to it just feeling ever so slightly more sort of floaty and less precise than it could be for what it is. And so I think everybody's really, really liking the remake. And so I think from the looks of it, the remake might do a slightly better job of just having that dialed in sort of mechanical controls. But it's not bad. It's not bad by any means. I'm enjoying it, right? But it's just, there's that slight edge to it where, like a game like Dark Souls can make dying a bunch really fun when I die in this. And I think the other thing is that it doesn't happen that often, and there's like a loading screen every time. There's more of a layer to it. There's a loading screen, and then maybe you get like popped back like before like an elevator ride, so you just have to like, you're waiting a minute, or you're running back through and you're picking up the same items that you did the first time. And so there's too much kind of like busy work stuff related to it, like and idle time and sitting. So to sort of make it feel really good, if you just got to, I think what would be kind of cool is if you had like a limited resource of like rewinds or something like that, where you could go back in time 30 seconds, and then like every time you like hit a checkpoint, you would get them back, something like that, where you would actually be still like, there's still attention for failure in terms of resource loss, and not just in terms of like your time and effort. Because there's also some cases where if I do a fight really badly and I like almost die and I use like 4 healing items, I'm like, I kind of just want to restart this. Like, I don't even really want to finish this, because that's just a huge like cost expenditure I've just done, and that's only happened to me like once, maybe twice, and I'm like most of the way through the game at this point. But it's interesting, and I think I don't know what the answer would be, but I feel like there's that tension between wanting there to be the threat of death, but not actually every time I die, I'm not like, oh no, I'm like...
Not to have the consequences. You want to have that tension without actually having those kind of consequences.
Or having the consequences be meaningful in a different way, right? Instead of kind of inconveniencing me. Having them be like impactful somehow. Okay, so there we go. We'll get into our first question now. That was a little longer than I was expecting to talk about it. But...
Oh, and the good news is this first question is from one of our new patrons. On Patreon.
So this one comes from Korey Ashcraft. And they say, you guys really are my sleep time podcast to listen to. I almost said sleepy time. I don't know why I made that like edit in my own head. Like tea. You really are my sleep time podcast to listen to every time you upload content. Also, I just finished Adios, and it was a magnificent game to play, and I appreciate the recommendation. As I finished it and thought of the storyline more in depth, I realized the creative talent of people never ceased to amaze me. So with that being said, have you guys had any thoughts on story writing, whether it be for a game genre or a book that interests you? So,
you want to go first?
Yeah, first, definitely, Adios is great. Anybody listening, you can get it for free right now, Epic Games. I mentioned that at the start. That's really good. Second thing, to Korey Ashcraft specifically, and anyone else who has played Adios. One of the creators, so the studio is Mischief who made it. One of the creators of Adios, and I think like the lead writer, is somebody named Doc Burford. And he has a series of articles on game design, narrative design, storytelling, his own opinions on video games that are really compelling and I think really well written. And he has a way of explaining his opinion really well. So even if you don't agree with him, you can really walk through and understand what he's saying. And get something out of it. You know, whether you agree with him or not, I think they're valuable and interesting and good sort of pieces of writing. So I would highly recommend if you like Adios. You know, it's obviously very different, but tons of more free content for you from the same mind, the same guy, and he might give you some other, you know, cool recommendations and stuff too. So that's a general thing. And then thoughts on story writing. Do you want to...
So this is interesting. So I'm much older than you are.
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I used to have, you know, delusions that I might have something interesting to say and that I would be able to do it. And I've had such an opportunity and privilege to meet so many different writers. And I don't mean meeting like going to signing and saying, oh, I love your stuff, signing, taking a picture, and then that's it. Although that's happened a lot too. Having gone to some conventions, I've had a chance to get to know some writers a bit more.
Yeah, we've both been to a fair number of literary conventions, and we probably have interacted with more full-time writers than the average person by a pretty solid margin.
So, and when I say that, I mean we're not like besties or anything, but that we might go out to dinner with them or sit and have like a conversation with them,
or even just have heard them on like panels talk about their craft.
That's
and their
true
work.
Too. Right.
We've spent more time around and hearing from creative people who spend their full-time like work hours doing writing.
So I've lost that delusion that there's anything that I could say in a way that would be meaningful without having to do a huge amount of work, because when you hear what they talk about and how thoughtful they are in crafting their stories, I think I don't have that capacity. I'd have to wait until I stop doing all this other stuff to be able to even have the possibility of starting doing something. And then even then I think I would have some trouble being successful, because here's the thing with writing, right? There's lots of really good writers. The problem is reaching your audience, and the great majority of writers aren't able to make a living at it. And I'm not saying that it's the most important thing is to be able to make money, but I think the most important thing is to be able to do it in a way that carves out the time that allows you not to have to spend a bunch of time making money to survive. Yeah. Because otherwise, you are just going to be starving. Like there's that cliche of the starving artist. While it might seem romantic, starving ain't so great. I'm not a big fan. So I think I like the idea of when we talk about being a writer, there's that difference between writing a story or having written a story and then getting to do to have all the trappings of, you know, promoting your book and doing interviews and you know, being on bestsellers list. You know, whatever. Like that idea.
All because when you think about it, there's like the doing it, there's the accolades, but then there's also like the administrative work. Right? And all of that, if you're, you know, a writer, you're kind of your own business. And you need enough money to have somebody to do the business part of it for you. Right? You need like an agent and a team. If you want to not have to do that administrative stuff.
And I used to think that part of the appeal was making something out of nothing, right? So other jobs, there's a framework where you do stuff and you have to do a bunch of work, and it seems much more attractive to be able to just say, okay, I'm going to make something just out of my head. I just have to put it down on paper, but it's all coming out of my head. And there was something that just seemed so much more freeing until you realize that you are very likely going to need to have a day job to support yourself, because that kind of imagination or whatever, that kind of work where you just let your imagination run free doesn't pay very well.
And so for my answer is that you sounded like you were wrapping up. I don't know if I'm jumping in or stealing your thunder.
Maybe just, I guess the one last point that's sort of related is that it feels like when I was younger that stories weren't as sophisticated. So now when I read a story, and I don't know whether it's because the internet has been easier to develop expertise or learn about stuff, but there were kind of, you know, when there's something in a show or a story
Yeah.
or movie or whatever that touches on a particular area of expertise,
Yeah.
if you don't know about it, then where it rings false, where it seems untrue, doesn't bother you as much.
Yeah.
But then now that we've got so much information, we see so much about, like, you know, you have access to experts, you read about things, you learn about things so much easier, that it's more likely that you're gonna have to do the kind of in-depth research to make sure that the false details of something don't pull the reader out of the story. It's so much more work.
You're saying people are more well informed now, or it's easier to be well informed about something. If something feels wrong, instead of just going, well, I don't know anything about this, they can just Google it and say, they are wrong.
Yeah.
I got them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I rambled on for quite a while.
No worries. So I feel like everybody has a differing level of sort of like intrinsic desire to like make something and put it out in the world.
Right.
And so I think what Korey is talking about here, you know, game designer, or sorry, a game genre, book that interests you, story writing, right? That's like fiction.
Right.
And so I think that I have kind of like a medium amount of intrinsic desire to just like make a thing. Where sometimes I'll like have an idea for like a video or something like that kick around in my head. I'm like, that would be cool. And so I think that's more than some people, but I think it's much less than most people who are actually professional creatives.
Right.
Because I think when you look at a lot of people who are sort of professionally creative, and when you look at, you know, people who I've heard talk about stuff, either like the big success stories or, you know, sort of the like artist middle class of people who can do it full time, but aren't like, you know, selling out, you know, signing events, stadiums, whatever, who aren't like, you know, New York Times bestseller top chart people, is that a lot of people, you need a really strong desire to make something despite the fact that you're not, your return on investment is not good.
Is very likely to be bad.
And you have to basically just want to do it bad enough that you're fine if it never turns a profit.
Right.
And so, you know, I think about like Bug Hunter. So he's somebody that I talk to on a semi-regular basis now.
Right.
I started out as just
musician.
a fan of his music.
Right.
He's done a Kickstarter just now that reached its goal in less than 24 hours for his new album.
Right.
It's really cool. And so he's, you know, growing this really sort of solid audience. He's got people who really love his stuff, who follow along, who will, you know, back him on Kickstarter, listen to the new album the day it comes out, all that stuff, you know. But he had a while where it was a full-time job and he was just spending all of his free time doing this, and it was just something that he loved. And I don't.
So when you say he had a full-time job, like on top of it, so he had a full-time job that was not music, and then any kind of sort of squeezing music wherever he could. Yeah, okay.
And that was like the thing that sort of was restorative. And so I, you know, do this with you. This is our free time.
Sure.
Right? And this is kind of in the mildest possible version, like a creative act. We are making something and putting it out. We are making a piece of content. And I find this really sort of enjoyable. But the friction that would be required to make me not find this enjoyable is so much lower than any sort of professional creative I've ever heard from talk about it. Right? The amount of annoying this would have to be for me to not want to do it anymore is so much lower than the threshold that I would need to ever turn, you know, being sort of personally creative into like a full-time job. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff that appeals to me a little bit. I'm like, oh, it would be kind of interesting, I think, to, you know, tell a story, whether that would be like in songwriting, but I'm not that good of a singer. I don't play any instruments, or, you know, like a video essay, but it's a lot of editing, and you know, you have to get the footage, and then you have to write the script and whatever. And so there's all these things that I'd be like, that would be cool if I could do it. And then I don't have enough of an internal drive to actually go and do the thing. And for some of the things, right, like I talk about video essays or like writing a song, I could just do that tomorrow, right? Like I don't need to have that be part of something. And for both of those are even like a much lower threshold than like writing a book. I could also like write a book or a story tomorrow, and it wouldn't need to be picked up for anything, you know. Like writing for like a video game, you actually need to get hired and have like a pitch and a portfolio and everything. But there's a lot of stuff that I could do that somewhere in the back of my head I kind of want to do that I just don't.
You don't want it enough
right now. I don't want it enough. And so I think, you know,
that's a pretty big realization, right? Like it's not just with making such a huge decision about what you're going to do with your life, whether you're going to be a creative or not. I think it comes up to a lot of things, like whether it's behaviors, like minor behaviors, or things that you should be doing. And when I talk to people, and they say, well, you know, I couldn't find time. I said, so you're not prioritizing. I said, no, but it is important. And I think that coming to the realization that there are priorities in your life that you maybe don't rank as high, even though they might be objectively important. Recognizing that yourself is a huge step in being able to potentially make the changes, or if not make the changes, be more at peace with things, so that you don't keep on sort of kicking yourself for not doing these things that you think you should, because you just don't really want to enough. Not that you don't want to, just don't want to enough.
So I think there's a decent chance that I will do some hobbyist sort of creative stuff throughout my life at some point, right? To, you know, a little bit here and there. But, you know, at the end of a long day, I would much rather like watch a show than like write like a screenplay for one. Right. Like, and so at the end of the day, like I'd rather consume media than create it. When I...
This channel notwithstanding.
In sort of my free time. Yeah, but like this is sort of easy. That's what I'm saying.
Low demand.
This is just me. This is just us talking.
Right.
There's not that much prep work time. It's pulling questions and then thinking about them maybe a little bit. And, you know, I'm the kind of person, I have a hard time like turning my brain off when I'm like watching stuff or playing stuff. I'm interested in a media analysis, although I'm sure I'm not very good at it, right? So this kind of thinking and talking and just sharing my opinions off the top of my head is very easy for me.
Sure.
And a lot of the stuff that I would be like, oh, it would be cool, I really want to do that, that I feel like would be, you know, a little more intrinsically satisfying, because this is fun. But after this, I'm not like, oh man, we made a really cool thing today, right? Sometimes I'm like, that was a nice conversation, you know? I hope people will enjoy listening to it, but it's different. It's very different from, you know, like crafting a piece of fiction or like a piece. It doesn't really feel like I'm making media. It feels like I'm having a more or less interesting conversation. And
that we're sharing it with other people.
Yeah.
Not that we're making something specifically with a goal to share it with other people.
Yeah. So that's how I feel about it. Is, you know, maybe one day there will be little stuff here and there, but I sincerely and seriously doubt that I'm ever gonna, you know, do something that's big or professional or really that's gonna get seen in any sort of wider sense, or, you know, appreciated by some you know, public.
Right.
Other than this. With its small audience, you know, being what it is,
their small intimate audience.
Yeah, I'm very happy for this. I think this is also more than a lot of people get to do in terms of
100%,
sort of
100%,
making stuff and showing it to people. And so I'm really grateful for that. And I think that also gives me sort of a new perspective, which is like, this is cool, but also it's easy. And if it was harder, I wouldn't do it. And this is like, I've already reached sort of, I've already gotten a little lucky with this, right? This has been like the audience that we built relatively easy, and the sort of attention that we got was very forgiving of us when our stuff wasn't as good, and it gave us space to get better and learn and keep going. And so for all of this going about as well as it could have gone for, I think, what we put into it, I think we got a lot more out of it than most people who put more into it.
See, this is a good point, because as you're talking about that, it makes me think about that. The word you chose, perspective, and we're never going to be the big shots. But the fact that we are involved in the space gives us this really interesting perspective, where a lot of it, you recognize the threshold for what a lot of people term, and I'm doing air quotes right now, of success, is pretty low. A big part of it is luck, but then there's a lot of things like that. Like I don't know if you remember when we had this conversation about university to start with. And I've always been pretty sure of the idea that you don't need a lot of intelligence. You don't need a lot of smarts to get a degree. The threshold for how smart you are, and if we define smart as being able to learn stuff and then demonstrate it in a way that will let you pass, is pretty low. A lot of it is really just putting in the time and having the opportunity.
It's like access to resources, right?
Yes.
You cannot, your resource can be that you have a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of internal drive. Your resource can be that you are really good at making connections and you make connections fast and easily. Your resource can be that you have enough money that instead of, you know, taking like a accelerated course load or needing to work hard and do so well that you get a scholarship or whatever, you can
not having to have a part-time job that takes away some of those resources, like your time.
You can take as few courses a year as you want, be there as long as you want, and just get through it can be the money for a tutor. It can be sort of the social capital. It can be, the social battery
Right.
to make friends who will give you the notes or all this stuff. There's a combination of resources that you need. But I think, not that everybody should, and not to say that everybody, literally can, or needs to do university, but I think the vast majority of people can do it with the right combination of resources, whatever that is for the person. And maybe that's, accommodations too, right? A resource can be accommodations.
Right.
And it's, luckily there's accommodations in place for a lot of people who need it, although I think in a lot of places they're not as good as they could be or should be.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think, so the reason why it was so important to me to make sure you understood that was because I think people lose sight of the fact that and it's not even necessarily a fault, but people lose sight of the fact that university is really meant to teach you things. At the end of it, you're supposed to have some sort of knowledge or ability to acquire knowledge, like the practice to learn things.
Yeah.
And the problem is that the value of a university degree has changed so much in the last, I'd say, 40 years, so that because it's required as sort of the entry level jobs or whatever you're looking for, so that they require a degree even when it's not necessary, that it's the value of the knowledge is devalued because it matters more just to have the piece of paper.
Yeah, it's like in making your sales pitch of yourself better.
Right. And what should bring you value is the understanding, where the people, it's become less about the education than it is about the piece of paper.
Yeah.
As a qualification, as a surrogate representation of, oh, this person is able to do the job. So, and it's a problem on all sides where employers, because they're requiring it, in a lot of ways are, I don't want to say devaluing that. There's a way, I'm trying to think of a way to express myself about this, but that because they're requiring it of so many people, that there's a lot of people who don't need it, and a lot of people who are getting a job who are not getting a job who would otherwise be good, because they're putting this sort of artificial barrier to it. A degree doesn't necessarily tell you how well you're going to do at a job.
Yeah.
All it tells you is that you had the time, you had the money, you basically you put in the time and spent your resources on it. So I think there's a real problem, because I think that other ways of learning can be just or more valuable, and university isn't for everyone, but the way, I guess, I don't want to say society seems like such a cliche, but the way society has started requiring it of people
the way that our systems maybe feels a little less.
Yeah, so it pushes a lot of people into university that maybe don't benefit from the same way, and what it does is it just sucks a lot of money and time out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true, because if I think about, my university career, there's been places where I've learned stuff and picked up stuff, but it wasn't every course. There's a lot of stuff that I did that I kind of just did because I was there and because I had to, and that was like the prerequisite step. This was like a stepping stone for like getting my degree so I could stop doing university.
Right.
And then the places that I learned stuff was kind of scattershot, and it was not really built in to the whole process of going to university.
It wasn't required.
I could have gotten so much less out of it very easily, and with no issue. And the places that I learned things were kind of...
It was luck. It wasn't integral to the experience.
And they weren't... I don't want to say unexpected, but I wouldn't have been able to tell you where the learning was going to happen. I wouldn't be able to tell you which courses it was in or which, places it would be.
Right.
And a lot of it was, I think, because of like individual professors who had a sort of noble goals. And it was interesting. During office hours, if we're okay continuing to go down this tangent, there was a professor that I talked to. I think I might have talked about this like years ago when it actually happened, like 2 years ago at least at this point. But who had really, I think, noble goals overall. For a lot of their stuff, they would give projects where the point was genuinely to learn, and they were, I was in a psychology program, and so educational psychology is sort of the best source of information we have, as far as I'm aware, for like what works for teaching people and what's like important for people to know and how to best get them that information. And so they were building this sort of course out with the really noble goal of using what we know about how people learn and what learning is to help people learn and think critically and sort of be academics, right? In sort of a pure sense, instead of just taking sort of the raw information, instead of regurgitating textbook information, how to teach people to, like, quote unquote, like, be like better critical thinkers, be smarter, right? And so it's interesting because I talked with the professor a little bit about it, and I think the thing is that I had a different perspective as a student, where all these noble goals are fine, but it felt very sort of like sterile, and it felt like it wasn't really acknowledging any path for students other than just being academics and just wanting to learn. And it was like, well, you should be focusing on the learning, not on the grade. And the problem is that it's really easy to say that. And I think it's like a noble thing to want to, you know, make it about the learning and not make it about the school.
But it's all incentivized wrong.
But he got a little bit, I think, lost in the actual process of building it out. Yeah. Because, you know, there's a lot of people, like you said, you know, our systems make us get degrees because it increases our sort of value in the labor market, because it makes it easier for us to get a job later. Right. And so there's a lot of people there who are never going to use the information you're trying to teach them again, who aren't going to be researchers, who aren't going to be, you know, reading a bunch of like scientific papers later in life, who are just doing this for the piece of paper and to leave. And when you are sort of force-fitting success to only be sort of pursuing the pure pursuit of knowledge and academics and critical thinking, you are sort of coming at this, and the way that he was talking about it with the class was like, I'm doing you this favor, right? This is how you, this is what you want, this is what you need, this is what's best for you. And I don't think that's true.
It's a little naive, right?
Yeah. So, you know, if I'm a student, and I said this to him, I said some variation of this, I'm like, so if I'm a student, right, if I'm going to become a researcher, maybe this is the best class I've ever taken, right? And you are great, and this is exactly what I need. But if I'm just trying to get my degree and go, you know, maybe what's best for me isn't actually spending longer in this course or doing things this one particular way. Maybe the thing that's best for me is to hang out with friends and form like long-term social bonds here, right? The thing that I'm going to take away from this is a piece of paper and some lifetime friendships, and not a piece of paper and the ability to research really well, right? So people with different goals fundamentally don't need the things that you're giving them. And so, and there is this reward structure, whether or not you like it, right? Yeah. Of the better grades matter more. Like, I'm trying to go to this post-secondary, like post-secondary thing. I'm trying to do this thing afterwards, and I need this grade for it. Right? If I didn't need this grade, I would not be here. You know, if I didn't need, I wouldn't be trying as hard. I wouldn't be working as long. If I didn't potentially need a letter of recommendation, I might not be in these office hours right now.
You said that?
I said that to him.
Nice.
I said, it's, you know, I'm here, and I'm like, I think this is a good conversation. I think this is valuable. I think that, you know, for the path that I'm on, I'm glad that you're my professor. Right. But if I was a different guy, it might not make sense for me to be in these office hours here with you right now. It might not make sense for me to be, you know, studying more, for me to be doing better. And I think it, you know, you have to understand that just because somebody has a different goal, right? They might be making what feels like the worst choice to you as like the educator. Yeah. But I think a lot of times we don't give people credit for making the decisions that are right for them. Right. Even if it's short-sighted, maybe people are missing information, right? The information that they're missing might be that, like, maybe I do want to like do a master's, a PhD after. Right. And if I don't realize that right now, I'm not going to work towards that. But a lot of times, you know, other than sort of the being lazy, the pursuing sort of short-term whatever feeling is a little bit nicer, some people do that, and I think, you know, they're not setting themselves up as much for long-term success. But I think we judge people a lot for not doing sort of quote-unquote the right thing. Right. And I think most times people have more information about what the right thing for themselves are.
And we might make different, even if we had all that information, we might make different decisions too. Yeah. But I don't know why, it just made me think of, it just popped into my head. I had to get over that maybe, I don't know, decades ago when I first started working out. I felt the same way about people who were bodybuilding. Yeah. Like that it was, they're doing the wrong thing. Well, to me, exercise was always about being able to do stuff, like to maintain ability, to build up as much ability as possible. So being strong, having endurance, not about necessarily making yourself look better, although that could be a sort of a beneficial side effect. And that there were people who were training literally only for looks. And I felt like they were missing out on so much. But you know what? There's people who just don't do any of that at all.
Yeah.
There's still value in it, and it matters to them and stuff. This is the one thing that's always interesting to me. And it, again, I feel like it's taken me so long to get to this point, is that there are different people will value different things. And if I couldn't understand that, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. That the figuring that out and recognizing at a gut level made it so much easier to be empathetic towards people. Like, not just recognizing intellectually, but really feeling like, oh yeah, they care about one thing, I care about something else. We can care about different things, and that's okay. Yeah.
Because I think that also, if you have that realization, it helps you when you're supporting and helping other people.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the thing that the professor was doing, right? Is that they were saying, I know what's best, so I'm going to give everybody the best experience, no matter how they feel about it. Right?
Right.
And
they don't know what they want.
Yeah.
I'm giving what they want.
You might hate this now, but I promise you it's better for you. And I think that just wasn't true. And so I think when you're like helping people and supporting other people, you're not trying to force them to do things your way or the way that you believe is best. When you're supporting people, I think really what you should be doing is giving them the information and resources to understand why you think one thing is better.
Yeah.
And, maybe the resources might help them if they know what's best already, but they aren't able to do it for one way or another. Maybe what they need is your emotional support. Maybe they need, something taken off their plate, whatever. Yeah. You're giving them the resources and the information to make the best decision for themselves. If you think you have information they don't have, right? Helping them with that. So, if he's a prof and somebody comes to him and they say, I don't want to do these, he says, well, what do you want to do with your life? And then helps them figure out. And then they go, oh, I actually do need this. And now, this is valuable to me. And I do want to do a master's. So I'm going to work hard now. Right. Then all of a sudden, if you've given somebody sort of the new information, if you're able to convince them, right. I think that can be.
This is totally a discussion of Prochaska's stages of change. Did you guys study that? Did you ever study it in school? So it's the idea, I don't even know all the different levels, but that it's talking about behavioral changes. And so, for example, you use it for addiction. So if somebody wants to quit smoking, if somebody wants to quit alcohol. And the most interesting part to me that was not intuitively obvious, well, it became intuitively obvious the more I got exposed to the Prochaska stages of changes. Yeah. But that there's two levels before you actually make a change. They're the pre-contemplative and contemplative. And that each level of change has a different requirement to get to the next level. So if you start off with somebody who's pre-contemplative, so they're not even thinking about making the change.
Yeah.
If you just give them tools to make the change, you're wasting your time.
Them, yeah.
Right. And if they're thinking about it, then that's when you give them ideas about what to do. Right? So but the key to shifting them from contemplative or pre-contemplative to contemplative is what you just said. It's convincing them that there's value. And maybe they're never going to be convinced.
Yeah.
But if you don't get past that level where they actually believe what you're offering them has value,
it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this model was a framework for helping people along to make behavioral changes in a way that was more effective.
Yeah.
And probably less frustrating because, you can tell people, all right, so this is what you can do. You can start exercising like this many hours, do this. And it wasn't happening is because you hadn't convinced them that there was on the balance for what potential health benefits and what it would cost them in terms of, let's say somebody's smoking, in their ability to socialize with people, to hang out at a bar, to, you know what I mean? Then it wouldn't happen.
That's we're talking a little bit about like addiction and stuff, right?
Yes.
And that was an interesting sort of reframing for me too. Is there's this idea that I think is pervasive with a lot of people, where people will say like, oh, don't give money to a homeless person because they might use it for drugs,
right?
And so that sort of framework shift of going and thinking about a person understanding what they want and they need in a moment better than you is the idea that if somebody is an addict, first of all, addiction doesn't correlate with intelligence, right? So like
Right.
somebody can know that doing drugs is bad and have the exact same knowledge as you, somebody who's, doesn't do drugs at all, who isn't addicted at all. And that knowledge, that doing drugs is bad doesn't help somebody not do drugs.
Right.
Right. And then also,
I think they have the best experience of knowing how bad drugs are for them. Yeah.
And when somebody is addicted, you have these physical symptoms of withdrawal. So the idea is that, if somebody is unhoused, if somebody doesn't have money and you give them money and they use it to buy drugs, right?
Yeah.
What has happened there? Well, they might be trying to stave off the acute, physical symptoms of withdrawal.
Right.
They know that, they don't have money. They know that they have a tenuous connection to food, limited access to resources, that, just because they have this money now doesn't mean they're going to have money later.
Right.
And they are doing the math in their head, right? They're figuring out what's best for them.
Right.
And I, as an external observer, might think, oh, this is terrible. It sucks that they have to do this. And I'm sure they know too, right? They know that,
I think they would much rather have the opportunity to have an apartment, like the place to stay, but the cost of it is prohibitive.
Yeah.
Like that, the difference between the comfort of doing something that sort of helps them survive this moment now isn't going to be enough for the long-term stuff. It's impossible to plan long-term. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's like that experiment with those kids where the
marshmallow test?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like what they were interpreting wrong the whole time because they couldn't put themselves in the place of somebody who had learned a real lesson that, hey, if you don't take it now, it will disappear.
Yeah, it won't be there at all for you later.
Right.
Yeah. So if you give money to somebody who's homeless and they use it to buy drugs, they're making the decision that makes sense to them right now.
Yeah.
And I just don't have the information to be able to evaluate that choice.
Like how bad are their withdrawal symptoms?
Yeah. How bad are their cravings or withdrawal symptoms, whatever. They know themselves better than I am. And they're making the decision that makes sense for them, even if as an external observer, it doesn't make sense to me. So if somebody is doing that, it's because they need that more than the food they could have bought with it. Right? In that moment, they need that. Right? And, you look at like the programs at work and the things that help people not do drugs is not giving them access to drugs, is giving them the resources to make the choice that they already know that they need to make.
Right.
And you sort of like withholding money from them or whatever else doesn't help them. Right?
I mean, and it's totally fair too that if that's not what you want, then don't give the money. Like, just recognize that if you are going to do it, like that it's not you're not buying something specific.
Yeah, that you don't get to make, and you also don't get to make a moral judgment on somebody and what they do with it. And
I mean, you can, but I think it's a bit of a dick move.
Yeah. And so, I'm going to tie it in. This is a little bit of like a half non sequitur, half sequitur. So we talked about
half sequitur, non sequitur. Okay.
So we talked about storytelling, right?
Yes.
We talked about writing. And when you talked about it, you specifically used the term delusions a couple times. Yeah. So I want to talk about Mount Joy, a song by the band Mount Joy called Astrovan, because this is about addiction and it's about storytelling and it's about writing, and so this is what I want to bring all together. There's a line in that, and it's about doing drugs and living free, and so the sort of refrain in the chorus is Jesus drives an Astrovan, and so it's about people sort of doing drugs, and it's about it's a really interesting song. It's really well written. And there's a line in it that I really like, which is every addict has illusions. And I think it's such a small sort of difference, but the connotation between delusion and illusion and the way that they're talking about addiction and substance use, illusion feels so much more warm and humanizing and sort of kind to the perspective of the addict, instead of calling them delusional, right?
Oh, I don't know that necessarily delusions are associated with addicts. To me, there's almost like a clinical quality to the term delusion, where it's specifically a false belief. Mm-hmm. And an illusion is where you see something and you're seeing it differently than what it is. Mm-hmm. So delusion has more to do with belief. Illusion has to do with more perception.
Yeah, but then there's also the really sort of negative connotation of delusion, right? So I was just saying that, in an interesting way of bringing it around to storytelling and subtlety and sort of talent and creativity and addiction and substance use. Right. That line specifically, it's a very small change. It's something that I would have had a really, I never would have come to by myself, but that little swap can make such a difference in sort of the the humanity that you're giving to the people that you're talking about.
Right.
So that's a really sort of effective piece of media and a very effective turn of phrase in a piece of media. So I think that brings together a lot of the stuff that we were talking about today in a weird way.
Yeah.
So there we go.
That was pretty good.
Yeah. A good episode of content. I think this was a pretty interesting conversation today.
Wide ranging for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So there we go. To finish up, I think we're done here. I'd like to give a shout out to Elisa. Download Adios for free on the Epic Games Store, Caton. I have hijacked her name and I'm using it to promote a game I like that you can access and try for free right now on the Epic Games Store. One more time, that's the game Adios, Adios. Try it, play it. It's really good. And we'd also like to give a huge thank you to all the lovely folks who support us on Patreon.
And that would be Korey Ashcraft. Sorry, I keep on wanting to say it because the only interaction I've had, I've seen that name before, like Richard Ashcraft, I think, is a singer. So I apologize. Korey Ashcraft supporting us on the last word tier.
You know what the cool news is that if for every time you say it wrong, they get to have their name repeated a couple times and you have a meta conversation about it. Right. You're turned into content for a brief moment.
True. Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi 127, Drew Chapman, who are supporting us on the credit level, and all the wonderful people that you're seeing on the screen right now who have supported us during this pandemic.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your support, and thanks so much to all of you for watching or listening. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.